the Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Everything Ravens podcast. This is week number 7 of the Everything Ravens podcast. My name is Logan. I'm the host of this podcast. I run the Instagram account at everything_Ravens, which is the biggest Ravens fan community on Instagram, sitting at 38,000 followers as we start this recording. Make sure you follow that account as well as follow at Everything Ravens podcast on Instagram to get all the latest updates involving this podcast. Now let's meet the co-host.
What's up, guys? It's Kyrie, ready to talk some football.
Hey, guys, it's Brooks. Thanks for having me back. Excited to be on with Logan and Kyrie and have all three of us back for this episode.
Yeah, this is like the first time in 3 weeks where we're all three here, so that's pretty good. What's going on right now? There's not really a lot of Ravens-related stuff going on right now, so we're just going to talk about some of the NFL stuff. I feel like that could be intriguing to a lot of you guys listening and could maybe potentially bring a broader audience just talking about the NFL in general. So obviously the hot topic first came out today, Jamal Adams. It's been kind of brewing for a while, but Jamal Adams officially requested a trade from the New York Jets, and he requested one of 7 teams that he'd like to be traded for, and one of them was the Ravens. The others were the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Texans. I forget who else, but I remember those 4. And 49ers. But yeah, Jamal Adams requested a trade. What do you guys think about that?
I think Jamal Adams is one of the most obviously dynamic backs in the league, safeties in the league. But my problem is with him going to the Ravens is just it doesn't make a lot of sense. We have Earl Thomas, Pro Bowl caliber guy. We got Chuck Clark who just re-signed. I just don't see the scheme fit as far as the schematics or our defense. Character issues. I heard little rumblings about Jamal Adams as far as the character issues goes. So that's another thing I don't want someone that has possible character issues coming into the locker room messing that up. So I just feel like the Ravens, we're known for defense, and that's probably what he's thinking. This is a hot team. They can go to the Super Bowl, but no thanks.
Yeah, I don't really see this happening. Unlike Kyrie, I would love to see it happen. I think Jamal Adams could add something to our secondary that we're slightly missing. I know we have a really aggressive secondary, but he can come up to the line of scrimmage. He's a big playmaker in the secondary. He just reminds me of a Raven. I know there's some questions with character issues, but I blame that a lot on how the Jets have handled this situation. Logan, you mentioned this was a long time coming. The Jets and him, they've had a poor relationship. They've had contract disputes in the past. He's been rumored on the trading block before, and they haven't been able to deal him. He's supposed to be a centerpiece of their defense. They should be treating him like a star, and they're not. I think he won't get traded. The Jets and him will come to an agreement and make him the highest paid safety in the league. But right now, it will be fun to see how it plays out. Obviously, he made that short list of all those teams he wants to play for. They're all contenders. This guy wants to win. He came from a winning program at LSU, makes big plays. Our name came up, swirled around him at the trade deadline. I think we like him, and there's mutual respect between the team and the player. But I don't see him making it to Baltimore before the start of the season.
Yeah, let me just say that I love Jamal Adams. I love him as the player. I love him as a person off the field. I think there's not really character issues there. I think he's an excellent person off the field, and I think people just say he has character issues because of his disputes with the Jets, but that's a whole business side of the thing. That has nothing to do with him as a person. But I don't think he's going to come to Baltimore, and I really question the scheme fit. I've made a post about before. If we were to get Jamal Adams, we would probably have to get rid of Earl Thomas, and Earl Thomas plays a really key role on this defense. He's the single high cover safety, something that Jamal Adams isn't. Jamal Adams is more of a box safety. Chuck Clark is kind of that same role as Jamal Adams, and I just don't think you can have 2 guys who are really similar in their traits and make it work.
Now, one team I saw on his list was the Chiefs, and I pray to God he does not go to the Chiefs because they're already going to be like our biggest competitor in the AFC for years to come. I don't need them to get Jamal Adams. I don't need that. But I would kind of like if we did get him, only because for once the Ravens would get a Jet player instead of the Jets getting our scraps. So that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, and watch if the Jets do end up trading Jamal Adams, they're probably going to sign Tony Jefferson because they love all our players.
Yeah.
And that's another player. He's not like Jamal Adams, but he can come play in the box, play up on the line of scrimmage. Has a similar play style, obviously not to the effect that Adams does. I understand what you said about scheme fit for Adams, and I know this is a hypothetical, but if he were to come to the team, I trust our coaches and our guys to make it work and get the most out of him. I think if this Earl Thomas offseason controversy was a bigger story, we'd be having a much more serious discussion about acquiring Jamal Adams right now. But that kind of dialed back a little bit. Doesn't seem to be that big of a deal anymore. Not to downplay it, but it's no longer on the hot seat. He should be a Raven come this season. And if you look at it, to me, it's about the money. I think Jamal Adams is on the brink of a huge contract, and I just don't know where that money's going to come from if he were to become a Baltimore Raven. If you look at Earl Thomas's contract, Adams isn't due for the money in a couple years, but he kind of wants it now. Maybe we could cut Earl Thomas or find a way to trade him a little early, get rid of some of that big cap and make room for Adams. But that's a lot of risk reward in that situation, even if we are able to trade him. I just don't see it happening for us. The teams I would keep an eye on, Cowboys, I know they're tight with money, but they love making big moves and figuring it out later. Bucks, they weren't on his list, but they're in win now mode. They can move around some picks to try to get him. And then obviously Seattle, they got rid of Earl Thomas. They got rid of Cam Chancellor. They got rid of Richard Sherman. They don't want to pay these guys when they're old. Adams is young. He's entering his prime. Maybe, when they let go of all those guys, this is what they were seeing, a young star coming in to take their place in the secondary. Those are the three teams I would keep an eye on for Adams.
Yeah, in my opinion, the Cowboys should be the favorite to land Jamal Adams. They've been his rumored landing spot for a while, even during the season when they were talking about potentially trading him. And Jamal Adams, he's a Texas kid. He's wanted to play for the Cowboys. I'm pretty sure he was a Cowboy fan as a kid. And they need a lot of help in their secondary. So I feel like that's really a match right there. Dallas is the team I'm watching the closest in that situation.
Yeah, obviously the loss of Byron Jones this offseason, he would slot in there well. But you have to look at that contract situation with Dak Prescott and go, is it a smart idea for Dallas to bring in another guy on the brink of a max contract on the opposite side of the ball? If they're trying to build up on the offense, they got an offensive-minded coach, they paid Amari, they paid Zeke. Which way are they going with this team? I think they have some tough decisions to make before they go out and aggressively trade for a guy like Adams.
I definitely could see the Cowboys. I wouldn't be surprised. That'd be a typical Jerry Jones move. But the thing that's frustrating me is the Jets. They have a problem signing their own talent that they actually develop and groom, but they want to spend all this money on big free agents that half the time never pan out. I mean, Le'Veon Bell, I don't know what happened to him in Adam Gase's system. C.J. Mosley, I love him, but he did get injured, so I can't. I'm going for that asterisk on that accusation. I don't know. It's just big free agent signs that never pan out for the Jets. This is a team that one time signed Tim Tebow. So I don't understand how you sell this money for agency, but you don't want to sign the guys you actually draft. It just look like a bad organization, but this is the Jets.
I mean, hey, why draft and sign your own players when you can just sign every former Raven to ever exist? Just take another team's players.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a point there, Kyrie. If you look at it, they traded Leonard Williams, a high draft pick that played well and looked like he could turn into something. Looks like Jamal Adams. I really do think he'll work it out with the Jets, but right now it doesn't look that good. And they aggressively pursued Anthony Barr last offseason, which didn't work out. They just have this tendency to jump on free agents and not really develop talent within, and that's why they haven't been able to make a long, consistent playoff run and build up from their foundation.
Realistically, the Jets aren't tied to Jamal Adams either, so if he's making them mad, they could literally trade him to whatever team they want. Like, they could trade him to the Lions for all I care. So who really knows where he's going?
Yeah, unlike the MLB and the NBA, when these guys request trades and they request trades to specific teams, the NFL, there's no love. It's a business. They don't really care where you want to go. As long as you don't have any trade clauses prohibiting you from going anywhere, they're going to send you where they get the best offer. You see in these other major sports, they really try to work out deals to send you the places that you request, not so much in the NFL.
I agree with that. I think the only time we saw like a head coach GM actually get some love training a player was Bill Belichick when he traded Jimmy Garoppolo for a second-round pick. Even the 49ers like, what? You just want a second-round pick, not a first round, the second round? Okay, cool. But we all know Bill's kind of trying to get back at Robert Kraft for telling him, hey, Tom Brady's staying, trade Jimmy Garoppolo. That's the only situation I can remember recently that actually was a win-win for the player and not actually the organization.
Another big name player in recent NFL news who probably is not on the trading block, but is saying he's going to hold out from training this season until he gets his big contract is Dalvin Cook. What do you guys think about that?
My opinion on Dalvin Cook is I don't think he can legally sit out. Like I saw something about it on Twitter, but if he sits out, then he'll technically only be in a third year, so he won't actually have a contract year. I forgot where I saw it. I'll put a link to it if I ever find it. But in my opinion, I don't think you should ever pay a running back top dollar. You see what happened with Todd Gurley. You saw it happen with Le'Veon Bell. It's the most replaceable position in the league. And you saw the Ravens kind of realize that this year. They understood that Mark Ingram's getting up there in age. He's 30 years old now, so they went and they drafted an absolute stud in J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State. They know you can just keep replacing that position with new talent every year. And Christian McCaffrey may have got paid that big money, and I think that McCaffrey might be worth it because of what he does in the receiving game. But I wouldn't pay Dalvin Cook that much, especially with his past injury concerns.
I agree. I mean, he has no leverage to me. I mean, I know he was the main ingredient in that offense, but you still got Kirk Cousins, and I know everybody's kind of split on Kirk Cousins if he's a good quarterback or not. I think he's actually a good quarterback. You got Adam Thielen, who I think is one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. So that offense still can produce numbers. You can easily replace a running back in the second, third, fourth round of the draft. Sometimes even an undrafted running back can actually be pretty good for you. So I think there's no leverage. I think it's going to end, by training camp. Second week of training camp, he'll be back on the field, ready to go. This isn't going to last long because the Vikings are going to stay pat. They're not going to pay this guy what he wants.
I agree with you guys. If you look at recent history, there's 3 different running back holdouts: the Ezekiel Elliott, Le'Veon Bell, and Melvin Gordon, all 3 with very different outcomes. Le'Veon sat out the whole season, got quasi big money from the Jets, not the money he asked for, but big money nonetheless. Didn't really work out last year for the Jets. Didn't pay dividends. We'll see how it goes this year. Zeke, that holdout lasted through preseason and through training camp, but right before the season, he was able to reach contract terms with the Cowboys and was a big part of their offense last season. That's where I see Dalvin Cook falling in that range. And then there's that Melvin Gordon story where holding out doesn't work out. He held out for half the season, didn't perform. He got less money in Denver than he would have gotten if he agreed to a long-term deal with the Chargers prior to last season. I think Dalvin's going to hold out for a little bit, eventually come around to terms with the Vikings. He's a system player, and the Vikings are a run-first team. I think Dalvin Cook is an extremely talented back, but he wants to be in a system that runs the ball heavy, that has a good complementary back in Madison, but doesn't overpower him at all. He can catch the ball. Kirk Cousins is a safe quarterback. It's a good fit. That's where he wants to be and where he wants to play. Just like Zeke wanted to be with the Cowboys, I think they'll reach a contract agreement right before the season.
And I think Cook has to remember, I mean, think of the Vikings' history of running backs. Adrian Peterson is one of the best that ever did it. And this organization was okay with letting him go at some point. So, and I don't think he's on Adrian Peterson's level. So, and the running back market is way different now back then because it's a pass-heavy league. So he's, like I said, there's no leverage. But I do agree, they will get a deal done. I just don't think it would be the deal that he wanted.
Yeah, back to my point earlier with running backs being the most replaceable position in the league. Like just using the Ravens as an example, ever since we lost Ray Rice, look at some of our running backs. Justin Forsett, Alex Collins, literally both came out of nowhere. So it's a really replaceable position.
Another thing I want to point out that was a lot of times during these running back holdouts when they're not training with the team and they're not in the facilities every day, there's a risk for injury. Dalvin Cook, already very injury prone historically for his career. That could be a storyline to follow. If he holds out all the way through preseason, will they slowly give him more carries and get him up to full speed, or will he just dive right in? Is there any concern there? That could be a storyline to follow too if he ends up sitting out an extended period of time.
Alrighty, so let's talk about the third disgruntled star that's making – well, he hasn't really been making headlines like really recently, but he has been making headlines all offseason. That's Yannick Ngakoue on the Jaguars. What are you guys' thoughts on him?
Well, the whole Jaguars organization is a mess from top to bottom right now. Every player is trying to get out of there running for their lives. Ngakoue was part of that great defensive line across from Calais Campbell. They've placed the franchise tag on him, but clearly he just does not want to stay. He's publicly targeted the owner, the front office. He wants out, and they've not answered him. It sort of fell on the back burner since the draft. I just don't see him playing in a Jaguars uniform come this fall. But they were shopping him at the draft reportedly, and there weren't a lot of takers, surprisingly. I don't know if the Jaguars' asking price was too high. I don't know if there's some personality questions that go beyond his relationship with Jacksonville that teams are concerned about. But no one really put in the offer I was expecting. I thought the Eagles might make a run at him. I thought we might see the Rams try to replace Fowler with him. When Brockers was also a free agent, I thought they might go after him. I just don't see him playing in Jacksonville this season when it all boils down.
I agree. That's just a bad situation. I mean, for a locker room, this is a guy that he just doesn't want to be there. And you don't want a guy that is not bought into your vision, not bought into your culture in that locker room, not bought into the organization goals. He wants out. And if I'm Jacksonville, I'll just give him, because guess what? You're already rebuilding. I mean, this team is done. That championship window was very small. It closed. It's gone. You're doing a complete rebuild, another rebuild. I don't know how many rebuilds Jacksonville has done in like this decade. I really lost track. So send him away, get a high draft pick, get a first round pick for him, and just make both parties happy. I don't know why they franchise tag him, why they're trying to let this thing go on any longer than it needs to, but he's not going to sit in Jacksonville uniform. I wouldn't be surprised if he literally sits out the whole season, just like, okay, I'm just going to sit out, do a Le'Veon Bell, and I'll just find a team next year.
I think that's the worst case scenario for both parties, and that's where it looks like it might be headed right now. If you remember, before they franchise tagged him, he voiced concerns about playing in Jacksonville, and then shortly after, he came out and sort of peacefully, it started very civil, said, my time has ended as a Jaguar and I should continue my career elsewhere. And then when they ignored him, he became very restless and started attacking on Twitter and going after the organization, going after members of the front office, and it became a huge storyline, and it sort of sidetracked the Jaguars offseason. But now it has come time where they have to address that issue. We're getting too close to the end of free agency, the start of the season. They have to make this move.
Yeah, I think the Yannick situation is different from Dalvin and Jamal Adams' situation, because Dalvin Cook, Jamal Adams, I feel like both of those situations can both be mended really easily. Whereas Yannick, I think his relationship with Jacksonville, like you guys have said, is just so fried to like a completely different level that there's just no way he's ever playing for him again. Like there's no way he's getting re-signed. Like if he's not traded before this season, like Kyrie said, I guarantee he will just sit out the whole season because it's just not good, his situation with the Jaguars.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Jacksonville is like pumping up that asking price to like ridiculous amounts of like, I don't know, draft capital or play. The asking price is definitely too high because there are teams that's interested in this guy. I mean, this guy's going to give you 8.5, 9, 10 sacks a season. He can rush out the gap to the quarterback in a pass-heavy league. A lot of teams want that. So if I'm Jacksonville, I wouldn't be surprised at being a little, petty, just being a little, okay, this guy doesn't want to be taking shots at the owner. Okay, we're going to make this a miserable situation for him, and we're just going to try to, like, screw up the asking price so he can just end up signing the franchise tag and playing for us. But I really do believe that was just backfire in their face. But I wouldn't be surprised that asking price is too high because I can't believe that no team wants to trade for this guy.
Well, if you remember, when they traded Jalen Ramsey, everyone thought their asking price was too high. They turned down all these great deals. They wanted too much. They wanted 2 first-rounders and then some. And they ended up getting it. They ended up getting that type of deal. So I wouldn't be shocked if they were running that same sort of scheme here. The only problem is Ramsey was traded in season. There's a lot more pressure. Your back's against the clock with the trade deadline. I think teams are willing to sit back and wait. I don't think there's a huge bidding war for Ngakoue right now. I think there's teams interested in him, but if the Jags are asking for too much and you're building up your team this offseason, you're going to look elsewhere. You're not going to deal with that right now. Eventually, they're going to have to come around and probably compromise because this has become too much of a public situation, too much of a public debacle. Same as when Antonio Brown was traded. That's a whole other scenario, but that blew up, and the Steelers actually got less than anyone expected. They ended up getting the better end of that deal somehow, but I think the Jaguars are going to end up seeing something like that, like a third and a fifth for Ngakoue, just because they've waited too long and this situation has become so public and so apparent that if they're unable to trade him, he is most likely not suiting up for the Jaguars this season and will just sit out.
Now let's talk about one more contract situation that's very viral right now. It's a quarterback. It's Dak Prescott, one of the most polarizing players in the league. You either love him, you hate him. What's your guys' thoughts on Dak's situation?
Well, I think Dak is literally, I think he's asking for too much. Now, I understand his agent and him, I believe, are thinking, okay, the salary cap is going to go up, which means we're trying to compensate for that because once we get this deal done, the next deal is going to make my deal look like peanuts. So I understand why they're trying to ask for a lot of money here, but Dak Prescott to me is not an elite quarterback. I believe he's a good quarterback. I don't believe he's the best quarterback in his division. I believe Carson Wentz, when healthy, he's the best quarterback in that division. A lot of Dak's stats this year was, to me, just came in late in games against bad teams. Look at his record against the winning teams this season. Just wasn't that impressive. You won all this money, but your team went 8-8. And I understand Jason Garrett, and we can all, come at him and say he's like a bad coach. But Dak Prescott, to me, hasn't been that productive. He hasn't shown me enough for me to believe he's worth all this money that he's asking for. I believe the contract offer that's out there now is more than enough for Dak to sign. He'll get paid more than once. He'll get paid more than Goff. I don't understand what's the problem, why he's still holding on the deal. Jerry Jones has a history of overspending. He literally overpaid half his offensive linemen, DeMarcus Lawrence, Ezekiel Elliott. This guy has no problem giving out money. So the fact that his contract's still not done, I feel like Jerry Jones is getting frustrated, which is why I do believe they signed Andy Dalton as an insurance policy because, like it or not, Andy Dalton can still play. I know he wasn't as good as he usually is this season, but he has taken the Bengals to the playoffs before. He never won a game, but he took them there before. This guy's a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. He's going to be one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league, and he could win some games with Amari Cooper and now a CeeDee Lamb. So I think that's going to be a very interesting dynamic, but the whole contract situation, man, has got way overblown. Just sign the contract, Dak, because you're not worth that amount of money. I'm just sorry. It's pointless at this point.
Kyrie, I agree with everything you're saying, but Dak is totally in the driver's seat here. And it's exactly to your point. Jerry Jones does have a history of overpaying players, and he's already offering this to Dak coming off a mediocre season where they went 8-8. I understand his statistics were good, and a lot of that came in garbage time, and he had inflated numbers because of that. But he was something like 2-6, 2-7, something outrageously atrocious against 500-plus teams. They missed the playoffs. He was loaded with talent. They've added to that talent. All he has to do is put together a better season than he did last year record-wise, and he's going to get more money than they're offering him this offseason. Dak and his agent are going to wait this out because they know they're in the driver's seat. The Cowboys are going to pay him. Dak is going to accept the final offer. They didn't even start contract negotiations till like early March, which was like way too late to start because both sides knew a deal was not going to be reached this offseason and they were going to settle for the franchise tag. I don't think Dak is worth that money. I don't think the Cowboys think he's worth that money, but I think they feel that they're in a weaker division right now and they have so much talent and Dak is good enough to get them over the hump. If he can prove it this season and put together a better record than he did last season, he'll become probably the highest paid quarterback in the NFL.
Alrighty, so let's just end this with one final player, and this one is different from the previous four guys that aren't getting signed. I mean, this is different from the previous four guys that aren't getting contract extensions and are becoming disgruntled over it, but this one's Cam Newton, the guy who's just flat out not being signed, which is kind of shocking to me. What are you guys' thoughts on Cam?
I think Cam's biggest problem is the injuries. And this is a guy that has a 6'6" quarterback. This guy got the size, he got the arm, and he can run the football. He has everything you want in a quarterback, but the problem is the injury concerns. And I feel like some teams are just, I don't know, maybe it's like, injuries, history, too much. We're just gonna wait and see. Maybe he'll be a late signing in training camp. It's kind of sad, honestly, how Cam has fallen. I mean, he was just a MVP of this league, and now he's unsigned. And the thing that bothers me the most is he's better than at least half of the backup quarterbacks now in the NFL. The fact that he still isn't signed, I don't know, maybe he's just, and he even said with a certain team, he'll accept a backup role. So I don't know, maybe it's just he doesn't want to be a backup for these teams that actually want to be a backup, or if he still wants to really be a starter and that was just kind of like a smoke screen. I don't really know. But it's pretty sad because Cam is really a dynamic quarterback. When he's healthy, he's pretty good. I mean, he was a former MVP. I know he gets some flack for the Super Bowl against the Broncos and the effort and all that, but you can't deny this guy is just God-given talent.
Yeah, I agree. When Cam's healthy, when he was healthy, he was arguably one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I mean, he has the league MVP to prove it. They just don't hand those out. My concern for him would be his attitude and his leadership. When you look at a backup quarterback position, you don't want anyone that would bring controversy to your team. I know he says he's willing to take a backup role, but that's not Cam's strong suit, is taking a back seat. If you remember that Super Bowl, I know there's a lot of questions with his effort, but at that post game, he handled terribly. He was a sore sport. He was a terrible loser. And that was against Peyton Manning, who's arguably the pivotal player of sportsmanship across American professional sports. So for Cam to handle that so poorly and all these losing seasons following, he hasn't handled it well. He's been pouty at times, moody, which is not what you want as a leader. It's definitely not what you want as backup quarterback. You look at guys who've lasted a while as backup quarterbacks in this league, Brian Hoyer, Josh McCown. These are bland guys. No offense to either of them, but they just do their job. They get there. They're veterans. They show up on time. They don't draw attention. They watch their film, and they help the young players out. I don't see Cam being that type of guy. I think that's why teams are shying away from him. He did have a full year off to get healthy, to try to recuperate and get back to his former form. If he is able to do that and showcase that in any sort of way, a team will, of course, take a shot on him because he does have that talent and that playmaking ability. But if you're looking for him in a backup role, you just never want a backup that draws that much attention and could bring that much trouble to the locker room.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one thing that I was kind of surprised was that the Chargers, I thought it was a great fit for him. I mean, you got the weapons. I know the offensive line is pretty spotty, but you got the weapons. I feel like the Chargers could be in a win-now mode. They had a better, Phil Rivers is a Hall of Fame quarterback, but he's at the tail end of his career. He might be successful in the Colts. We don't know. But I thought Chargers would have been a great fit, put a spark in that fan base because, let's be honest, the Chargers don't have no fans. So I thought that would have been a great move for them overall. Even Chicago, I mean, you traded for Nick Foles. I mean, seriously, Nick Foles? I know he won a Super Bowl. I know that, but I still think Cam Newton healthy is better than Nick Foles. So I thought that could have been a cool dynamic to bring him to compete with Mitch Trubisky instead of Nick Foles. So I was really shocked that one of those two teams didn't sign him. And at this point, he might be a late training camp, maybe preseason signing, or maybe not be signed at all. It's very surprising that no one's took a chance on Cam Newton.
Yeah, I think the two landing places I see for him, Pittsburgh, obviously, Big Ben's up there in age. They need a backup quarterback. They've always been able to handle locker room controversy pretty well, to their credit. And then a second one is bringing him over as a leader to Washington for Dwayne Haskins. Ron Rivera always liked Cam Newton. That could be a good fit. But I think outside of these teams that we've listed, he's looking for an entry in a midseason signing. He might pull kind of what a Dez Bryant did and wait and hope a team contacts him late season that thinks that they have a shot if they can get a veteran quarterback.
Yeah, I think a huge problem with Cam's situation right now is this year's like much different from past years is the league's just run completely dry on the need for starting quarterbacks. Basically any team and every team you can think of has a guy they think is their guy in place as starting quarterback. That's why you saw Jameis Winston having trouble finding a job, Joe Flacco having trouble finding a job, and those guys happen to settle for a backup role, and I think Cam will have to do the same. I think one situation where Cam could sign with the team and end up starting is maybe in New England. If New England gets into training camp and sees Jarrett Stidham and thinks that he's not going to be their guy, they could be a team that pulls the plug on Cam Newton. But other than that, I think 100% he'll have to settle for a backup role.
Yeah, I just wonder if New England was going to make that move, would they have pulled the trigger earlier? But as you said, with all this COVID stuff going on, they really haven't had this training camp they expected in the up-close look at Jarrett Stidham. So maybe that move comes later this offseason. And again, New England, a no-nonsense place. They have a history of signing these guys that have been troublemakers on other teams and bringing them in and either converting them or saying, if you can't play by our rules, you're going to leave. Antonio Brown was the Exhibit A from last season. And there are other big-name free agents still out there. Jadeveon Clowney still out there. Devontae Freeman still out there, says he wants to play for a team. I think these guys will end up on rosters eventually. Freeman may be a little bit questionable. As we've talked about, running backs are very replaceable, and he's getting up there in age. But in terms of Cam, there's just such a small market out there for quarterbacks, like you said, Logan, and his unwillingness to adapt and take that backup role, in my opinion, I know he says it, but it's what he's shown in the past, really makes me look elsewhere if I'm trying to get a backup.
All right, guys, so that's going to be it for this week's episode of the podcast. I would like to thank you to everyone for listening. Your support goes a long ways in helping to make sure this podcast continues to run. This podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It is no longer available on SoundCloud, but it is available on Google Podcasts, as well as Overcast, Castbox, any of those other podcast apps you may listen to. I'd like to give a big shout out today to Brooks Lebo and Kyrie Jones for helping me co-host this episode. They do a fantastic job each and every week. Both are excellent with this and know a lot about the Ravens. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Spencer Silverstein, our executive producer. We could not make this show work without him. He does all the behind-the-scenes stuff. He's the hardest worker here. Big shout out to him. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Jack Davis for making the intro for this podcast. He did a fantastic job. All of their Instagram bios are in the bio of @Everything Ravens podcast. So make sure to hit them up, give them a follow. That's all we have for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in. Go Ravens.
They gonna get a Super Bowl out of me. Believe that. Believe that.
No copyright intended. All content rights go to their respective owners.